Hello, everybody. I ended the last video by saying that I wrote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about their intrinsic versus extrinsic article and how they could omit a solution, at least minimally, must be acknowledged a proposed solution to the intrinsic versus extrinsic theory of value. So I got a response from them, actually. I got a response saying that I needed to provide a little bit of evidence. So what I needed to do here is identify the specific claim, place, or passage in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry in question that I think should cite her work but doesn't. Identify the work by Ayn Rand in the specific passage that directly addresses the claim, and indicate why you think this passage in Rand addresses the problem being discussed. So, pretty straightforward. Before we get into the article, let's just review exactly what it is that Ayn Rand has proposed to us here. So, let's look at this. This is the passage, I believe, that should be in the article. Of course, the whole passage won't be, because in the article there isn't whole passage quotes. It's rather a rewording of the argument. So here, these are Ayn Rand's words. The intrinsic theory holds that the good resides in some sort of reality, independent of man's consciousness. The subjectivist theory holds that the good resides in man's consciousness, independent of reality. The objective theory holds that the good is neither an attribute of things in themselves nor of man's emotional states, but an evaluation of the facts of reality by man's consciousness according to a rational standard of value. Rational in this context means derived from the facts of reality and validated by a process of reason. The objective theory holds that the good is an aspect of reality in relation to man, and that it must be discovered, not invented by man. Fundamental to an objective theory of values is the question of value to whom and for what. An objective theory does not permit context dropping or concept stealing. It does not permit the separation of value from purpose, of the good from beneficiaries, and of man's actions from reason. So this is what we are working with here. So let's jump into the article. So here we have it, the intrinsic versus extrinsic value. So we're going to look here and going to see like where Ayn Rand's addition of a trichotomy rather than it just being a simple dichotomy should fit. So for instance, we take this first paragraph. Intrinsic value has traditionally been thought to lie at the heart of ethics. Philosophers use a number of terms to refer to such value. The intrinsic value of something is said to be the value that that thing has, quote, in itself, or, quote, for its own sake, or as such, or in its own right. And extrinsic value is value that is not intrinsic. Okay. Well, already we see here that they acknowledge that value is the heart of ethics. So Ayn Rand would agree with this. Ayn Rand would say that, yeah, actually, we need to have, value is always for living beings to help live their life, to survive, but not only to survive, but to flourish. And thinking of value just existing in an object intrinsically doesn't make any sense. Like a rock doesn't have any intrinsic value. It depends on the person making the valuation of it. It needs a valuer. Otherwise, there can be no value. Non-living things don't have the need for values. They just exist. They don't survive. Living things need values in order to survive, and not only to survive, but to thrive, to flourish. So we could say that we could put it in right at the beginning, right? Say that, yeah, no, this makes no sense. The in itself, the for its own sake, the as such, the in its own right, it doesn't make any sense. And why? Because this is fundamentally a mystical idea. Right? This comes from Plato's idea of the forms and the ideal, perfect, universal nature of things, which has the value in it, and we just recognize or remember its meaning or shape or characteristics or whatever it might be. This is fundamentally mystical. Okay, so here's the table of contents. What has intrinsic value and what is intrinsic value? This article acknowledges that this is a little bit out of balance. Like, what is intrinsic value is a more fundamental than the question of what has intrinsic value. But historically, they've been treated in reverse order, which is very odd. Already, historically, they've started with a mistake. They've started with what has this thing that we have not defined yet. Plato is kind of the start of this, as mentioned. And of course, Plato is not the only one, but Aristotle also did it, but he did it in a more mild way, you could say. The student couldn't quite shake off the chains of his teacher, who taught him for at least 8 years, if not 20. Okay, we're not going to go here, right? There's talking about Plato and Aristotle, but it could be here that Ayn Rand is put in to correct them. Okay, what is intrinsic value? Sure. It says, again, what was at the start of this. But of course, again, this makes no sake. There's nothing valuable for its own sake, meaning valuable. A non-living object doesn't have any value for its own sake. It has no sake at all. It has no will. It has no volition. So it's pointless to talk about values for non-living things. So it just talks about what is intrinsic value. Certainly we could add in here that intrinsic value is the idea that value is divorced from any evaluator, right? Which would show that it makes no sense. So should I put it in here? That's the question. I don't know. It's tough because any place you put Rand in here, it just blows up the whole distinction. Because, of course, it blows it up because it blows it up by 50% larger, the whole thing. Is it intrinsic? Is it objective? Or is it subjective? Objective in the sense of Ayn Rand's definition. This is where her philosophy of objectivity comes from. It comes from this distinction of where value comes from. So her philosophy of objectivism, sorry, of course, her objectivism is centered around this fact of how value is derived, that is neither intrinsic nor subjective. We can go to the very end here and just talk about what is the intrinsic here, what is the extrinsic here. So what does it say here? That which is extrinsically good is good, not for its own sake, but for the sake of something else to which is related in some way. Okay, that's good. For example, the goodness of helping others in a time of need is plausibly thought to be extrinsic, at least in part, being derivative from the goodness of something else, such as these people's needs being satisfied or they're experiencing pleasure, to which helping them is related in some causal way. So he talks about pleasure here, alluding to sort of utilitarian theories. That are also consequentialist, just adding up and are essentially hedonistic. So the two questions arise. The first is whether the so-called value, extrinsic value, is really a type of value at all. It wouldn't be in the sense, for instance, this is basically extrinsic value would just be like how you feel. I feel that it's good, or I feel that it's bad, or it's intuitive, is based on a whim sort of thing. Like, we can't justify it when we're talking extrinsic or subjective. It's just saying like, yeah, it's just my intuition. And this is basically where everybody falls into right now in the world of philosophy. They fall into the intrinsic or the subjective. Either the thing is good in and of itself, which is fundamentally recognized as a sort of mystical understanding. And then you have the extrinsic or the subjective side, which is rejects the intrinsic, idealistic, universal thing and says like, no, that's not true. It's just about what you feel. It's about the whim of the moment or your intuition. And they can't justify it any further. But this makes no sense. So, of course, there are people, skeptics in general, that are skeptics of all knowledge, or even nihilists. For instance, that'll say that we can't even know that objects exist. But most people would recognize that, for example, let's take the rock again, that the rock exists objectively, and we can measure its characteristics. We can measure, how large it is, or length, height, width of it. We can measure its density, how strong it is, how much it takes to crack. You can even measure the color in a way, or at least determine the color of it. And you could do this, as most people would acknowledge, objectively. We could objectively say all these measurements and characteristics about the rock. But then when it comes to value, and what value does this rock have for my purpose, my goal, say, well, that's just subjective. That's just based on your feelings or your intuitions. And it's not. It is as objective as the fact that it exists. And we justify its existence rationally. We can justify its value rationally as well. I will give the same example of a stonemason looking for a rock of certain sizes, a certain density, and also a certain color, because he wants to have an aesthetic value in his wall. And he could give you an objective argument about how this rock fits the value. And this value wouldn't be based on his feeling or his intuition. It would be justified using his rationality. And it could be argued against as a value using rationality as well. But for instance, that same rock that had the good value for the wall could have a bad value if I, as a rock skipper, came along and evaluated it. Say it's way too heavy. I can't skip this, and it's not flat. And that would be objectively true as well, because I have to look at my goal, my value, what I'm trying to achieve. Remember, in the context of surviving or thriving, of human flourishing. So if I have the goal of skipping the rock, that is how I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to live my life in this moment to skip a rock, and I could give you an objective evaluation of this rock, and using my rationality. So this is objectivism. This is where Ayn Rand comes in, and this is her greatest achievement, essentially, and it is ignored, especially when you see articles like this that mention Alex Hagerstrom, A.J. Ayer, everybody from Hume to John Dewey and Blanchard, and all these people that are in a way more minor philosophers, even though some of them might be a little bit more major depending on your view. But that's the point. So we come down to the third section here. Is there such a thing as intrinsic value at all? Well, no, there isn't. So this is clearly where she could come in. But like I said, when we put her in this article, it blows up everything. Everything that comes before and after just becomes meaningless, because it is an objective understanding of value. And it completely destroys the understanding of intrinsic value. And might I add, intrinsic value is already destroyed by all of the thinkers in this article. If you read it, they will say, well, the problem with this view is this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and there's always a problem with something. Oh, well, what is the problem with the view of objective value? The biggest problem is that it's not automatic. It takes effort and good reasoning and rationality. If that's the argument against it, it's fine. There is nothing that comes automatically. There's nothing that comes without effort or work. Everything in life needs effort. That's just how it is. The only things, this is why mysticism is so appealing, is because mysticism says that to know the truth, you don't need effort at all. All you need is belief. Your reason is definitely not needed. All you need is to believe. And then how do we know this mystical truth? somehow. That's the only answer you get. Oh, somehow. There is no rational basis for it. So anyway, so if we come back to this, where are we going to put Ayn Rand? Where am I going to suggest to put her? Well, we have Alex Hagestrom here. He preceded Ayn Rand chronologically anyway, so maybe he comes first, and then John Dewey comes here, and he technically preceded or was living alongside Ayn Rand, and she had a lot of criticism about him, her contemporary. So maybe just after John Dewey, before the more contemporary philosophers here. So what though? We're supposed to say that Alex Hagestrom had the nihilistic non-cognitivism view, or the start of emotivism, which is basically just when you say that something is valuable, you aren't saying that it's actually valuable. You are expressing your desire, or you're telling people that you like it. Like this rock has value. What you're saying is, yay, rock. It doesn't say anything, right? So yeah, value nihilism, you could describe it as. And then John Dewey, he just he destroys any sort of foundation or any sort of value other than what is expedient to the moment. Based on what? Well, just your feelings in the moment. Sure, you can use your rationality, but rationality can only be understood as a system that is consistent, and it can't be changing based on whims or anything else. So he talks about this of having value, and then, or rather, that there is no value because of this. Value is just basically a subjective something. So I guess I should suggest that Ayn Rand should go here after John Dewey, and then it gets blown up from the middle, and then it just continues just ignoring her. This is the problem. Like, where should she go, right? Anyway, I'm not sure what to really say, but this outlines the problem with modern philosophy. It is continuing the same mistakes that have been going on for millennia, and they're honest mistakes. I mean, people were trying hard, but they couldn't quite formulate it. And Ayn Rand is the one we are most indebted to in understanding objective reality. If you divorce yourself from any sort of attempt to realize what is objectively true and good in the world, well, you're just a skeptic that doesn't really believe in knowledge. And then my question is, why do you even argue? What is the point of even trying if there is no way to truth? Is the whole point is just to say, oh, it's just your feelings, man. It's just your intuitions. No, you can't know this. It's just your feelings, and just keep repeating this forever. I have no idea. I would say that if you can objectively acknowledge the existence of things, if you can objectively acknowledge the existence of a rock, you can objectively acknowledge its value. As so long as value is understood as something that living things have in order to obtain their goals, to live well, to survive first and foremost, but then to live well. So I am going to write to Stanford here and suggest that this should be in between here, but then also acknowledge that this blows up everything. And but that's how it has to be. Like, it can't be ignored. It has to at least be acknowledged and then maybe refuted. Fine, but you can't just ignore it. All right, this has been me actually thinking today. Let me know how I did, and I'll see you in the next one.